One of the things that we have found is Greg has been very willing to look over what you may be buying. We've had students get dressed up and go visit him in his office. We're happy to do that as well. Just use our services. And Cody might share some information about his interview with you.
Actually, I was going to show you a picture of what I wore to my interview at Brown.
Okay, good. Yeah, he just interviewed for his residency. So for those of you who attended Cody's presentation when he was here a few months ago on campus, you might remember he's a University of Utah medical student. Cody's from Gunnison, Utah.
Mount Pleasant.
Oh, Mount Pleasant, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And attended the University of Utah Medical School, where he will graduate in 2 weeks.
Yeah, graduation's on the 17th. Just did my last class yesterday.
Yay! Very exciting. So he's going to chat with you a little bit about some things that you really need to pay attention to. And we're very excited that he's here. I apologize that we are over time. But I'm going to let you just get right in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, do we need to take like a 5-minute break?
I think let's just go.
Okay.
If they need to run out, they can.
All right, actually, before I get into this, so just so you all see, this is what I wore to my interview at Brown, where I was matched in neurology, which this was actually like about as out there as I think you would want to dress in, because you know, it's like a beige suit instead of gray, and you know, I had like a beard going, but I was kind of going for like a rural motif. We'll talk about that. And I didn't want to look like a...
Did you wear cowboy boots?
No, I didn't wear cowboy boots. I did wear brown shoes. But yeah, it was kind of, I didn't want to look like a returned missionary necessarily. I kind of wanted to, you know, not distance myself, but I wanted to look like I had gun license. All right, so like I said, my name is Cody. I'm just graduating at University of Utah Medical School right now. I had the pleasure this last year of working on the admissions committee, and I saw hundreds of applications go through our process. So who else going medical in here? Doctors? All right, then what else do we have? PAs? APA? Anything else? Some dental.
Optometry. PT.
Okay, good. We have a good mix. I mean, mine's more medical focused, but I think these general principles apply to all of these. All right. Oh yeah, and sorry, I look like the poster child for the don't section of what to wear at interviews, but we moved yesterday. I drove down here at like 4 this morning, so just a little haggard, guys. Okay, so did you all get a piece of paper? I'll get your handout. Yep. So whether you're taking notes on a computer or whether you're, whether you just want to write on that paper, we're going to go through each of these 10 things. I purposefully did not put them on the paper because I want you to write them down as we go. The paper has some other stuff we'll talk about at the end. So, and this is just basics. You can see them each one by one. So the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about is the admissions committee itself. They see, thousands and thousands of applications. They can tell your flaws from your applications before they even fact check you, which they are going to fact check you on everything you do. Don't lie, don't artificially inflate your application. They've seen people who have had every experience just like yours, but if you try and make it, if you try and turn your 3-day medical mission to the Dominican Republic into you being the savior of the Caribbean islands, they're gonna see that pretty easily. And they're gonna look right through it and say, okay, well, I mean, this is all a straw man, it doesn't mean anything. And then, yeah, how many of you people were at my presentation a couple months ago? Okay, good, so we're only retreading this for a couple. Like I said, it only takes one red flag to sink an application. Not necessarily that it will, but it's kind of like playing Russian roulette. If you go on the negative side of any of these points, you can, shoot yourself in the foot. Not necessarily that you will, but you can. So just try and, if you can make something pristine, make it pristine. They're going to see through it. This is just brief on the process. We had over 4,000 people applying for 122 spots. So I just kind of want to talk about a little bit of the process of how they start narrowing it down. It's mostly algorithm based. So we get 4,000 applications that come in. Immediately they're put into a computer that cuts out anybody with an MCAT and a GPA below X. They don't tell us what that number is. It changes every year based on how many applications they get. And so there's just like a certain number of applications that don't even get seen. They're just thrown out the window. So you gotta have a good GPA and a good MCAT to get you in the door. Once you get into the door, that's when your application is gonna be your ticket into getting into medical school. That's why you guys are all here at this application workshop. This is probably the most valuable thing, single thing that helped me get into medical school is what you guys are doing right now. So anyway, there's that first cutoff, and then if you make that cutoff, they'll send you a secondary application request and a SVI, which is like standardized video interview request. Have you guys talked about these much in previous classes? All right, so the standardized video interview, secondaries, it's just essays you write. You write them like any other essays. For the standardized video interview, you get 5 questions. 4 of them are video questions where they'll give you a prompt. You're sitting in front of your computer, and then you have 30 seconds to think about the prompt and like 2 minutes to answer it. So you have 30 seconds, suddenly your webcam turns on, and you're just answering these questions. So you might want to practice that a little bit before you actually do that. And we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the very end. If all of that goes well, like you'll get scored on each point of that. And you have the SBI, then you have an essay that you have to write where you're given like a minute to think about what you're going to write on your essay and then like 7 minutes to write an essay. If you get through that, then you get to the interview day, which involves multiple mini interviews. Have you guys talked about those? Okay. So you got those, your standard interviews, and then an ethics test. I don't think they're actually factoring in the ethics test to our calculations at this point. They're still just finding data as to whether it's even useful. Yeah, so one story that we had this year that I thought was pretty inspiring. There was an applicant who they had disclosed at their thing that they had a moderate form of dyslexia, fairly crippling. As far as writing, reading, that kind of stuff goes, which is pretty important in medical school. But their personal statement, their experiences, anything that they had to write was just phenomenally written. You could tell they had taken it to a writing center, they had taken it to other people to help them edit it down. Now, they did their SBI, and the SBI includes the essay portion, where you only have about 7 minutes to write an essay, and his essay was, poor to, horrible. Because he had the severe dyslexia, everything was misspelled, there was incomplete sentences, you could just tell he really struggled with this. But instead of that being a negative, us as the admissions committee saw this and we're like, man, when this guy wants to write something, when he has time to write it, he can make something good, despite his disability. So, they know that you have weaknesses, they know that you have problems, but are you willing to overcome them to get into medical school? All right, this one. Presentations up here. Okay, so this one irks me. So make sure people read your applications. I'm sure this has been hammered home a lot in this application workshop, but I think for my personal statement, I had about 30 drafts. I probably had 10 people review it. That's just what you have to do. And then more than just reviewing it, have people review it for a specific purpose. I take it to the writing center and my writer friends to check all the grammar, to check the structure, to check the flow and the voice. And then that's going to help you with that aspect. I take it to my family to say, does this represent me? Do you feel like I'm getting my heart across in this? I take it to the Rural Health Scholars leaders, to admissions committee members, if you can get a hold of one, to read, to say, is this what you guys are looking for in your application? So have people review it and have them give their specific niche of opinion on it. And yeah, so a couple stories on this one. Oh, there was this guy who sent in his application, and his personal statement was super weak, had all these horrible things. His biggest experience was like marrying his wife was like his big thing. Like, oh man, I married my wife. It was one of the most challenging things I did. Or something like we all laughed really hard. And you don't want to be that applicant in the admissions committee. He only filled in like 7 experiences. If he would have taken that application to Rita, if he would have taken it to anybody with half a brain about admissions, they would have said, like, get this thing the hell out of my computer. Like, this is horrible. Redo it, everything. But they were obviously very arrogant because they didn't get a proofread. Like, they weren't willing to take somebody's criticism. So if you're not willing to get a proofread, it shows that you're arrogant and that you don't care about improving yourself, and that's not what an admissions committee wants in an applicant. That makes sense? Too harsh? Not harsh enough. Another one, so I try and do my part, because I really appreciate the people who helped me out in this whole process. So it was actually, I was talking to my Uber driver in Mobile, Alabama when I was out interviewing at their neurology program, and her daughter was applying to medical school. So I said, oh, you know, if you ever want me to proofread anything, this is my email. And so she actually emailed me, you know, a few months later, say, okay, well, this is my daughter's personal statement. Would you mind going over it real quick? And of course, I said, oh yeah, of course, I love doing this kind of stuff. So I went over it, and it had like serious problems. It was definitely like a first draft kind of personal statement. And it had some good stuff, but probably like a third of it, especially at the end, just had all this stuff about like her ACT and then preparing for the MCAT and like stuff that the admissions committee doesn't want to hear about. And I was like, you got to get rid of that. Like, that's just not good. That's a weak essay, and it's weak because of this and this and this. So I sent it back to them, and then the daughter emails me back and was like, hey, I was kind of going for this, kind of like justifying it. That was fine. She's like, but I rewrote it and, you know, did your edits, and she sent it to me, and it still had all that same garbage that I said, you know, take that out. And I'm like, well, you really need to take that out. Then they sent it to me again a few weeks later, and it still has all that garbage in it. And I'm like, why are you sending this to me? You're not making any of the changes. So I actually stopped emailing them. I should email them again. But But it's like, if you're not open to criticism, if you're not open to being critiqued, it shows that you're not humble enough to change yourself. So get reviewed. That's a big, big point. All right. Okay. Submit day one. The way it works, there's a finite number of interview slots. There's a lot of interview slots, like 400 or 500 or something at the U. But they get swallowed up pretty quick. The medical school is incentivized to fill every interview slot as fast as possible. If you don't submit early, then you're not going to be read early, you're not going to get your SVI and your secondaries early, you're going to get your interview invitation late, and if you get it at all. Those spots fill up, so submit as early as possible. Also, there's some stuff, and I'm kind of confused about how the U does it now, but sometimes people will have these rolling admissions where if you're in early, you'll actually have more opportunities to be seen by the admissions committee, and it kind of works like that at Utah. And also, at the beginning of the season, all of the admissions committee, they're fresh, they're excited for a new year of applicants and stuff, and usually the first people to get interviewed are like the golden group, like they're the upper echelon people, and their chances of getting in are much higher. Now let me tell you a little bit about how, oh sorry, did you have a question?
I was just saying, like in a 3.5 month range, like where's the cutoff for early, like early enough to get in that slot of?
I don't know what the cutoff is. Submitted.
I mean, you think like if the application process starts on April 25th, where you could submit your application.
Yeah, submit by April 26th.
1st or something like that.
Well, for PA,
I know, it's
you're PA, so you can't submit until your transcripts are done for that semester, unless you're taking a gap year, so as soon as possible. You know, mid-May-ish for PA is right around when you want to. For med, dental, and pharmacy, all the others, the day the CAS opens is when you should be submitting. You've had plenty of time.
Sorry, I shouldn't be so simple. PA is different.
Yeah.
So let me just tell you a little bit about how the admissions, shoot, I lost my train of thought. So in the early season, the admissions committee, they're all new, they're all excited for these new applicants, and if you get in with that golden group, then you're just more likely to get said yes to. Where once you get to the end of application season and you're in the admissions committee, they will start voting you down. So the way it works is you'll have a representative, basically your lawyer, who's assigned your file. And they read everything about you, they look at your I looked at the people's Facebooks and, looked up, like if somebody cited a research paper, I looked at the journal that they cited it in, read it. So you have somebody that should just know your application and know you inside and out. They get 5 minutes at the committee to present you and give your highlights, give your lowlights, give their opinion on how good of an applicant you are. So then after 5 minutes, the committee, they can either go on to continue reviewing this person, or somebody can make a motion, and if somebody seconds that motion, the person's application is immediately thrown basically in the garbage. They don't have a chance anymore. At the very beginning of the season, if you do 30, 40 applicants in a day, there might be 1 or 2 of those that are motioned off. At the end of the season, it's probably about 50–60% of them you just motion straight through, and their applications are thrown away, just because the people at the end of the season are lower quality. That's just kind of how it works. You don't want to be grouped in with the lower quality people. You are upper quality people, I hope. So get in early. There was actually somebody, and Rita was talking to me about this person this last cycle, who she was telling me about their application, and they sounded fantastic. They had all of these extracurricular experiences, they had good grades, they had everything, from what I understand. And I was like, man, I'm really surprised, because I don't think they got an interview invitation, right?
For you?
Yeah.
They interviewed you.
Oh, they interviewed it.
Didn't get accepted.
Didn't get accepted, okay. But, so, and then I went and I talked to one of the admissions, administrator people about this. I'm like, this person had this and this and this and this, why do you think? We're like, well, did they apply on time?
Oh, yeah.
And
This person was late. We called it late.
yeah, and this wasn't, and I didn't tell them that they didn't apply on time. This was just their first knee-jerk reaction was, did they get their application in on time? And I was like, no, they actually kind of applied late in the season from what I understand.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, that'll explain it. You just have less of a chance if you go late.
Yeah.
So, and this is coming from somebody who's been doing the admission stuff for years and years and years. Submit on time.
And on time is not the deadline date. If you apply on the deadline date, you're dead in the water.
All right. So next one, I'm not gonna hit it as hard as you've probably already been hit with it, but
Did you see your name up on the board?
Oh yeah, I see my reputation precedes me.
Yes, it does.
So was that for your branding lecture that
We
you had?
talked a little bit about branding and how important it is.
Yeah, and I keep actually updating that brand statement. So.
Oh, good.
So yeah, you're trying to sell yourselves. You have to have a brand. You have to have a simple little, way of expressing exactly who you are and why you are important to that med school. What's the slogan for McDonald's?
I'm loving it.
Loving it. Subway?
Eat fresh.
Easy, breezy, beautiful. See, you guys know that. Maybe it's Maybelline already. So you've got to do that kind of same idea with yourselves. They've got to be able to see your name and say, oh yeah, that's that person. That was this and this and this, and I really liked this. Yeah, you guys kind of already talked about it, but this is kind of my example of what I did for residency applications. My name is Cody Sanders. I'm an educator and musician who works strenuously to give back to rural, underserved areas such as where I grew up. If they read that, they kind of know who I am. I mean, did I say I like people? I like to help people. I mean, I kind of did. I said philanthropist. Actually, I think that was in the earlier draft. Anyway. Everyone likes to help people. Everyone wants to make the world a better place. You gotta go deeper than that, and you only have a sentence to do it. It's tricky, but I have the utmost confidence that with this workshop and everything, you guys will get there. Let me just tell you a couple other stories from the admissions committee. So we had this applicant who, this actually wasn't this year. I was told about this. This was like 5 years ago. Our cutoff for GPA is 3.0, you can't get in if it's less than that, typically. This person applied, and for whatever reason, when all their credits came together, their GPA was actually like a 2.7 or something like that. Very low, but we lost their projectors.
Oh, no.
That happens in here for some reason.
They're older,
You shut off.
overheated.
All overrated.
The other day when it happened, it did, when it cooled off, it came back
It came
on.
back on. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Do you need this?
No, I mean, I've still got it in front of me,
Oh,
but
okay.
you guys don't have it in front of you. So anyway, this guy had it was like a 2.75 or like a 2.8 GPA, not a great GPA, but, and actually at this time he'd already been accepted. But they could have kicked him out at that point and gone with somebody from their wait list. But the thing that saved him was his brand. This guy, he had grown up homeless with his single mother living out of their car. And he had basically pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He had worked super hard in college to get just that GPA, you know, while trying to sustain himself. And you know, his brand showed how much of a hard worker he was, where he came from. It showed how good of a person he would be in medical school. And he got into medical school, and he kind of middled the class. He wasn't like the top of the class or anything, but he worked like you wouldn't believe, just like they knew he would work like you wouldn't believe. And he ended up becoming a cardiologist. I think they average like $450,000 a year or something right now. And just an incredible story and his brand saved him. Another one, this was actually a candidate that I presented personally. I was their lawyer. She was an MD PhD candidate. Anyone in here thinking MD PhD? Oh, nice. Good luck.
Yeah.
So all of the MD PhD candidates have insane research and like all of this crazy stuff. But what I liked about this person is she had all the research. She had, you know, years and years in labs and stuff like that. But she also worked as a CNA. You know, she had been wiping butts. She had been working hard. She had all of these extra experiences that showed that she really did care about people. And that was part of her brand is, you know, even though she had all the academic accolades, she had all of the everything, what we liked about her was, you know, she had heart. She had all of this other stuff with her because that's what her brand included. So you gotta sell yourself. You can't, it's not enough just to put your experiences on a platter and send them away. They've got to show who you are. All right. Next one. Okay, so this one is kind of coming a little late, but coaching your letter writers. Stop blinking.
There you go.
All right, so you guys probably already have your letters of recommendation in and everything. So I'll kind of breeze through this pretty quick. But you have to coach your writers. You have to tell them what to say, or else they're going to give you a generic letter. Now, I was amazed how much weight they put on the letters of recommendation in the admissions committee. Like, there were so many times where they're like, oh, well, they have this letter from this professor and this letter from, you know, this doctor and stuff. And they were just kind of generic and, you know, didn't say anything. And then they move on. And then later in the thing, when we're deliberating, they'll be like, well, their letters of recommendation were weak, and, you know, that kind of goes to a detractor against you. But if you have a letter where it's somebody you've been working with for quite a while, and they can say, I worked with this person and they were among the top 10. You really want them to put something in like top 10, most exceptional, something that says that you were above everyone else they worked with. Because that was always cited in every admissions committee if you got somebody to do that. And you also want your letter writers to, you know, go with your brand. You want them to know what you're going for. And so to illustrate this, I put in a sample from a letter. My letter writer was nice enough to send it to me as well. She's a family medicine doctor working in Moroni, Utah, and I had told her that I want you to talk about my commitment to rural communities. I'd love it if you could talk about the time we spent together in our clinic down in Moroni, Utah, and then that I came back later and kept working in the rural area. So I just kind of like guided her on like, this is what I'm trying to get across to the admissions committee, and her letter was handpicked. You know, I handpicked her for writing a letter because I wanted to get this across in my application. So this is her first paragraph. It's actually a very long, nice letter. Probably 50% of my interviewers cited this letter being like, man, this Eileen Jackson sure wrote a good letter for you. And I'm like, I know, I told her to. I didn't say that. So yeah, so Cody Sanders is a very enthusiastic medical student who I had the pleasure of getting to know several months ago during a rural family medicine rotation in Moroni, Utah. This guy has worked a special rotation in a rural area. I was pleased to receive a request from Cody for a letter of recommendation. I like him. I am a family medicine physician and a sole provider in a small rural clinic. You can kind of picture this in your mind. You know, you've got that clinic, the one clinic in the middle of tiny rural Utah, and she's running everything. She's a fixture of the community. And then, you know, later Cody returned, so I didn't just go there. I let it change me, and I let it continue to guide my experiences. working our time, came back to work in Mount Pleasant, and then this is the thing that you want to have in all of your letters. I have worked with many students over the years, and a few of them, like Cody, really stand out as being exceptional, which, you know, for me, I was like, really? But you want something like that, something that puts you above the other people they've worked with, because a lot of people will write letters saying they worked in my lab for 2 years, they were a hardworking, you know, good employee. That's not going to cut it with these letters. They have to say, they worked in my lab, they made new protocols, they did X, Y, and Z, and they were probably my favorite my favorite student I've had internship with me. You know, something that puts you above the other people that your letter writers work with. Anyway, you guys have already done this one.
My letter's already in, but I'm just so curious, how do you guide a letter writer to write that?
Oh man, I could go on for a while, but what you have to do is you put a packet together. Your cover letter is, thank you for writing this letter, I really appreciate it. My brand is, you know, for me it's serving rural communities, educating, music, or, you know, music was like my third one. And so then you say, for your letter, I'd really love it if you could focus on this. And that's kind of your cover letter saying, like, you always on this. The next part of what you're telling them is, remember that time that we worked with this. And if you read this letter, it continues to cite a few specific examples of time. Like there was one time where we were, we had you know, like an OBGYN, like a delivery. It was late on a Sunday night at like 4 in the morning. But I still came in just because I wanted to be there and help out. And so, you know, you say, oh, remember that time we did this, and we ended up sleeping in the recliners in the doctor's lounge, and I was really afraid that I was going to miss the whole delivery because I fell asleep. And she writes about that, and if you continue on. So, you know, you want to give them a personal experience. They don't remember you. They don't remember the experiences they had with you. They have new students come through every so often. The only experiences that are going to stand out are the ones that you tell them that stood out. Your next thing, you want to send them a copy of your CV. You want them to know all of your accomplishments and how great you are. And then your last thing is you need to give them the instructions of how to submit their letter and how to do that. And there's more stuff you can throw in, but that's the gist. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. All right. Has anyone seen Ant-Man and the Wasp? Anyway, so one of the best pieces of advice that Rita gave me was to apply to MD and DO schools. And I'm a strong believer in DO schools, and definitely including them in your, you know, net that you're trying to cast out. So, and, you know, especially looking back, like your application isn't as strong as you think it is. Like you're not as good as you think you are once you see what you're up against, but you never get to see what you're up against. So, if you were at my lecture that I gave a couple months ago, one of the big things I emphasized was having a 20-60-20, where 20% of the schools you apply to are like your reach schools, like, oh, I want to go to Johns Hopkins or Brown or the Mayo Clinic or something like that. 60% are your, I have a decent chance there. So that's going to be like your University of Utah, maybe Reno, or like, you know, kind of like the good DO schools and medical schools that aren't like the Ivy League ones. And then you have your safety schools, which are going to be, you know, and this is more on like reputation, not the education you'll get, but a lot of the DO schools are just easier to get into. I hope that's fair to say. I definitely don't want to downplay how good DOs are, because they are fantastic. But I have a lot of people in my medical school who are they're like, oh yeah, I had to apply for 3 years in a row to get into medical school. I'm like, well, did you apply to DO schools? No. Because to them, I guess, being an MD was worth 3 years of their life rather than being a DO, which is just insane to me, because one of the people I specifically wanted to talk about here is Dr. Jim O'Loughlin. He was a DO surgery resident that I worked with, and he was probably the best surgery resident I've ever worked with, and was fantastically smart. But anyway, so after having said that, I just wanted to caveat that with the only issue I see with DO schools is you can have a slightly lower match rate. But having, you know, after saying that, I think this is the 2018 data from the National Residency Match Program for match rates of osteopathic applicants. And you can see they're really similar to the MD applicants in a lot of categories. So like if you want to go into internal medicine, family medicine, child neurology, or where I'm going, neurology, you have like a 90% or greater chance. That means you only have to be in the top 9 of 10 people in your class, you know, in like the whole driver to get in there. That being said, if your heart is set on being an interventional radiologist or an orthopedic surgeon, you can still do it as a DO, but it's going to be difficult. That's just the landscape of what we're looking at now. My feeling is that this is changing over time, and that these statistics are going to get better and better. And again, I don't think that you should have your heart set on any specialty before you go to medical school. But if you do happen to be that 1 out of 100 person that's like, I have to be an interventional radiologist because my dad was an interventional radiologist or something, then maybe you could consider taking a few years off to really bolster your education to get into like an Ivy League or into like a higher grade MD school. Like I said, DOs are as good, if not better than MDs, but when it comes to the match, they have slightly lower rates. One other tidbit, I don't think that you should apply to the Caribbean, to Ireland, to Australia, to these kind of dock factories that are offshore. Their match rates drop really low. They're like 50 to 60% match rates, and it's just a headache you don't want. If it's between spending an extra year to bolster your application and going to, you know, St. Kitts or one of those ones out there, just like, I met a few people on those interview trails, and for me, for matching, I had to apply to 30 schools, and I got like, I think I ended up with 17 interviews overall. There was people from these international schools that I met at a few of the schools, and you know, I just asked them like, how many places do you apply to? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, I applied to every program in the country, and they were getting, you know, like maybe 2 or 3 interviews. So I just don't recommend taking that route. It's a personal choice. If that's what you really want to do, go for it. You can be successful that way. It's going to be a hard struggle, and it's definitely not going to be easy.
I might just add to that, I have known a few students that have done the Caribbean route who have not matched with a residency. I've got one right now. And a few states have got a new position that is licensed, and it's not a physician assistant who's gone to OPA school. It's called an assistant or associate physician for someone who is not matched. It's licensed in Utah and 3 or 4 other states, but even those people are having a hard time finding jobs. So there is still something out there, but it's hard. It's very hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is this fair for you to
That's
say?
very, yeah.
Okay. I was very, very nervous about talking
No,
about
I think
MDD and
that's-
stuff.
Cody,
Yeah.
do you know if osteopathic school influences your chances for fellowship once you finish? For example, if you did a residency in internal medicine and then you wanted to specialize in medical specialty, does just being a DO put a glass ceiling on you compared to the MDs?
I don't think it ever puts a glass ceiling on you. And I haven't looked at the numbers for fellowship more, but I think it just depends on how you set yourself up. If you're gonna do the DO route, you have to make yourself stand out, and everyone's making themselves stand out. For fellowship though, it's a little different because most people fellowship where they did their residency at. So if you match to a residency that has fellowship positions, then you're probably not gonna have a super hard time getting a fellowship position at that institution. And so you might put that as a big consideration going into residency, saying, hey, does this program offer good fellowships that I'm interested in?
My brother-in-law, he did DO, and he's actually an orthopedic surgeon, or
Nice.
he did his residency, and he just barely got accepted into a fellowship out on the East Coast for joints. Anyway, but we were talking, and what he said is at that point, it's more about connections than
Credentials.
so like where you do your residency, like yeah, that plays a small role, but connections is the big key.
Yeah. Well, and I bet he's probably a lot smarter than I am on this, and especially if he got into orthopedic surgery, it's at the top 23.5%, so you can tell he's already a very quality individual to have made it through there.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is there was people that that would judge programs on how strong they are versus like how many DOs to MDs they had, how many internationals versus MD DOs they had. But that was, that was just a few opinions that I saw out on the interview trail. All right. Any other questions here? Okay. All right. So I got a little bit more cynical as this presentation went on. It started with tying your application up and shooting it. But so there's a very popular school in our state, just over here. They have, I think they just have like a cookie cutter that they put on to applicants, and they all look exactly the same. They're great applicants. You'll see these people who have these wonderful experiences. They've gone abroad, they've done all this crazy research and all this stuff, but they look exactly the same as the last 5 applicants you saw. They don't have a voice that's shining through their application. Promise we won't have too many Marvel references in here, but you think of the Avengers, each one kind of brings their own spin to the table, each one adds something to the team. That's what medical schools are trying to get. They're trying to get a diverse population of opinions that they can put together into a really good medical school team. So you gotta have some personality that shines through. Now, I also kind of put the caveat that you don't want too much personality. Like, when I was it was actually that same interview, Mobile, Alabama, there was this other interviewee who, she just like dominated every conversation that we were in. She was always talking about herself. Just be respectful of everyone's opinion, but don't be afraid to let yourself, to let your personality shine through. Don't sterilize your application so much that it looks like you stamped it out in a cookie cutter of the book of how to get into medical school. Because that's how hundreds of these applications that make it to the admissions committee look. And those are the ones that, I shouldn't say universally, but will often just get motioned to the trash bin, which is very unfortunate. So, does that make sense? It's kind of the Goldilocks principle, not too much, not too little, but you gotta stand out, and you gotta have your own purpose. Your goal isn't to get to medical school. Your goal is for medical school to supplement what you're already doing and put that on the path of what your goals are for life. Medical school is not the finish line, but it's what's going to help you achieve your life goals. Does that make sense? Do you see the kind of difference in thought opinion? I feel like I'm explaining it poorly, but I hope it's coming across. All right. So these next ones kind of all flow together. So this I'm sure you've probably been told, but you've got to be kind to everybody. Everyone from the custodian to the dean of admissions. You just have to be kind to them because each of them has the potential to shoot you in the foot if you, if you're discourteous to someone, even if you're not being discourteous but appear to be, they, I'm thinking like the secretary at the admissions office. You think, okay, well, she's the secretary, but probably doesn't have any real power around here kind of thing. Dr. Chan would respect her opinion 1,000,000 times before looking at your application if she said, yeah, he was kind of arrogant when they were all talking, when all the applicants were sitting here waiting to be picked up and they were talking. Or, he dominated the conversation about himself. Or, I guess I shouldn't always say he, she dominated the conversation. Anyway, you see, you gotta be nice to everyone. And this extends into your multiple mini scenarios. I'm sure you talked about this a little bit. But you're going to be given some ethical conundrum, and the answer doesn't matter. They don't care if you get to the right answer. What they care about is seeing how did you get to your conclusions. So if you've got an ethical conundrum and there's kind of 2 choices to go, they want to see that you're going to weigh each side of those in your interview. You can say, I can see this side. I can see how this side would think this and this, but I disagree with it because I feel like this side has this and this. And always be kind to everybody in the scenarios. There's one, I can't say the exact scenario it is, but I think it can be vague enough that they won't get too mad at me for saying it. There was a scenario involving a student who couldn't do a class because of a religious conflict. And some people gave really good answers where they weighed both sides. They're like, oh yeah, maybe the school could make special accommodations, but that might make it harder on the teachers. And they just reasoned it out. They did a very good job of it. There were other people who straight up said, well, then they shouldn't have gone into medicine. And that's just oh my gosh, why would you tell me that? I just feel like you're a horrible person. when they're probably a really nice person, but they just weren't thinking about what their mouth was saying. It's like, you know, they want to see that you're compassionate, that you can see all sides of the argument. And those people who said that on their thing, I made special notes in their MMI saying this person was not compassionate. They were definitely in the bottom 3 of the day. And so then when I was in the admissions committee and I saw my notes kind of to myself, like, because I had like my own secret ranking system that I would give people in my interviews, so that when they came through the admissions committee, I could be like, oh, I remember this person, and you know, they were like one of the top 3, or they were one of the bottom 3, or you know, like it would help me to recall who they were. And so when those ones came through who had said that, I like was adamantly like, I don't want these people in this medical school. And there's a lot of things that you can trip up, and they probably didn't mean it quite like that, but how else can I take something like that? What other way can I take it?
So Cody, would you elaborate on that typical question that comes up that always has to do with you observing someone else who is not playing by the rules, whether they're cheating on an exam or in a clinical setting or even out in practice?
Mm-hmm. So you mean like how would I answer that question? I mean, you have to, what I really like to see is when people try and personalize each side of it. So yeah, you see somebody who's cheating, I feel like the best thing is to approach them first personally, if that's possible, to get their side of the story. But if it's like something really blatant that needs to be reported, then you have to report it. You have to see how you have to play both sides. You have to be kind to the person who's, you know, a cheating, dirty, rotten thief, just like you have to be kind to the institution and all of the rules that they have to follow. You have to weigh both sides of it. And depending on the given scenario, there may not be a right answer. Maybe this person was, you know, I mean, in this one it's fairly black and white, but, you know, maybe there is a situation where it's like, okay, maybe it's all right if they didn't pull their share of the work or something because they had X, Y, and Z going on. You know, and you just have to say, like, I don't agree with this person cheating. I can see why they might want to cheat. I could see the pressures that are undergoing them, and I would really recommend that we get some help for them in that area. But ultimately, we have to follow the rules of the institution, and I would have to report them because of it. So you see how you go with both sides. You gotta please everyone. Think of being a really bad politician. And like I said, you can let your personality show through. If you're passionate about something, you can say, I am passionate because somebody cheated and edged me out of my top spot in my class or something. And you know, and you can be as passionate and fiery about something as you want. You still have to consider both sides, even if you take a harder stance on one side or the other. You just have to say, I respect them because of this, this, and this, but I disagree because of this, this, and this. Is that fair enough? All right. Okay, this last one is pretty obvious, I think, but maybe not to everybody. Maybe not to the people who this might apply to. Just try to avoid politics. You know, politics, religion, hot button issues. You know, avoid talking about abortion. Avoid talking about immigration. Just things that are going to alienate you from 50% of the people. Because if you remember, like 2016, half of this country voted for Trump, half of them voted for Hillary. If you were to stand up in any given room and, you know, swear your support for one side or the other, half of the people in that room are going to disagree with you. So where you're not put in the position where you have to do that, then don't. Just, you know, just let it be on your, you know, actually not on your Facebook because they'll be looking, but, you know, keep it in your private conversations, you know. Because they want you to have opinions. They want you to have your, you know, your church, your religion. They want you to have your political opinions and your passions. But there's a time and place for that, and in the interview is not one of them. Like, you guys have seen these kind of cars, right? Like, do you want to be friends with them? Like, do you want to talk to them? Like, and I mean, maybe this is my bias, but like, I really don't. I don't feel like I want to talk about waterboarding Obama or impeachment is patriotic. Like, I mean, I just, you know. They don't want to pick these people for their medical school or their residency. That's, you know, they want people who can get along with everybody. So just steer clear. Fair enough?
Cody?
Oh, yeah.
So when you say things such as abortion, that's not including. So like, will they ever ask you in an ethical question about something such as abortion? that maybe you could make the trip that long.
Yeah, I mean, not in anything that I've seen. I mean, there has been instances where I've been asked, you know, maybe like a lesser political type thing. But again, go back to our, you know, principles of the scenario. Weigh both sides. You can give your opinion, but make sure that you've, you know, paid respect to both sides of it. You know, abortion's a harder one to do because it's a very hard line. You're either on one side or the other, it seems. But, you know, and we all know the arguments for both sides. So even abortion, the worst example possible, you could still do that. You know, say that you are pro-abortion. You know, you say, I respect that pro-life people want to preserve infants' life. I respect that they want this and this and this. But it is my opinion that this and this and this. So even then, you can, you know, see both sides. You can be friends with everybody, I promise. And they want to pick people who will be friends with everybody. So you guys, I trust that you can use your brains and, you know, just use those principles we talked about in the ethics scenarios. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so this is my last bullet point. Probably the most important as far as the admissions committee is concerned. Sorry it's very wordy, but so if you were kind of dozing off, falling asleep, come back now and let's talk about this. So, your experiences are extremely important. In the medical application, at least the way it was this year, unless it's changed this year, but you get 15 slots. And use all 15 slots, fill up everything, because when the formula that you use to kind of rattle off what somebody's application is, you say, oh, their personal statement was this, their this was this, and then when they get to experiences, their experiences, they filled out 7 of 15. Don't be that person. They'll be like, oh, they filled 15 of 15 slots, and their highlights were this and this and this. And their 3 most meaningful were, and that's usually how it goes. Like they'll say they filled 15 of 15, their 3 most meaningful included this, this, and this. So fill in every slot. Your 3 most meaningful ones, make them the ones where you did the most, the one where you shine the most. I would say, you know, probably half to more than half of applicants put some form of shadowing as one of their most meaningful experiences. And you can have some great shadowing experiences, but invariably they always lead to how good the doctor that you were shadowing was, not how good you were as an applicant. So I recommend not using a shadow experience as your most meaningful, because you probably didn't have any creative input unless it was a very, you know, out there situation. So pick the things that, like, you created something, you spent 6 years doing something, the things where you accomplished the most. And now this is not the end-all be-all of how you need to write this, and there's a lot of opinions on how you should write this. But these are kind of the 3 things that we talked about that we wanted to see people in the admissions committee. So like, we need to know what you did. So like, I used one of my examples from applying to med school. I volunteered for the 4-H as an after-school mentor for children for 3 hours a week for 2 years. So you say kind of what you did, and so that they get a feel for this person had this experience. And this is a pretty straightforward one, but there's a lot of them that are, you know, more sticky. Like, because some people will put, has anyone volunteered for like the MDA camp or anything like that? Camp Kesem maybe. Actually, I don't think I saw anyone put Camp Kesem as like patient hours, but I saw them use like the MDA camp as patient hours. That's probably the trickiest subject, is when you're putting in your patient exposure hours, because experiences can vary widely. Like if you're working at Chrysalis, anyone here in that situation? Got a, you know, one. So that's just an easy example, because it's like, is it patient care, or is it a work experience, or is it volunteer? So if you're putting it as patient exposure, make sure you're saying how they were patients. Like, you know, I was helping shower the patients, I was helping you know, plan their nutrition, like things where it just doesn't sound like you're trying to turn, you know, basically babysitting people for 12 hours a day as patient experience. Sorry to kind of pick on Chrysalis, I've never worked there, but I hope that example's fair enough. So make sure your patient exposure tells you what you did. On the flip side, don't say I went to the Dominican Republic and was delivering babies and was, you know, administering medications and suturing and doing all this stuff that you're not supposed to be doing. So yeah, so state what you did. You know, make it very clear so we can get a clear picture of your experience. State how it changed you. So for me, the children at 4-H often came from underserved populations and difficult social circumstances. it helped me to realize how important educational experiences can be in changing this paradigm for them. So not only what did you do, how did it change you, how did it affect you? And then the last and arguably the most important part is how did it evolve? How did you take the knowledge that you got from your one experience and how did you turn that into something productive? So for me, that was, using the lessons I learned in 4-H, I began an international organization focused on providing educational experiences for children in need in an underdeveloped region of Northwest India. So we want to see a progression and evolution. We want to see experiences that you've been there for a long time and you've really changed because of it. We want to see that you had creative input, that you did more than just show up, because that's one of the things that is the least impressive on an application, is somebody just shows up for something. It's easy to show up, it's hard to create. Make sense? All right, so that was my last big point. Oh yeah, gold star, you guys got through this presentation. These are a couple of other things that I wasn't going to go into talking about because I'm sure you either already know or it's too late or whatever, but failing the MCAT, applying without a score, having a poor GPA, like I said, there's a cutoff, like the secret cutoff that you can just out yourself from there. And again, and if you're in that situation, make sure you're applying based on your strength. Like if you're in a situation where you failed the MCAT or something, maybe you should go for a few of those more safety schools than trying to get into Johns Hopkins. Same with GPA. Oh, this is a kind of a big one. Make sure you have primary care shadowing experience, because if somebody doesn't have primary care shadowing experience, I think there was maybe 2 that didn't just get the, well, let's give them another year. That always came up. Let's give them another year. Let's give them another year, because if you haven't done primary care, people are gonna, if you haven't shadowed primary care, the committee is going to assume you don't know what it's like to be a doctor. And they don't want to put somebody in med school who doesn't know what it's like to be a doctor. So make sure you have primary care, internal medicine, family medicine. Yeah, just get it done. Then LDS missions, medical service trips. These are really great experiences. I had both of these on my application. But don't let your 3-day trip to the Dominican Republic be the big, grandiose, center ring story of your application. It's very good to include, but you're probably not going to change a whole lot as a person in 3 days. You can, but I wouldn't try and argue that point, unless it's morphed into something where you went to the Dominican Republic, then you were a trip leader and worked for the next 6 months setting up the next thing, or something like that can be good, but don't use like a 3-day experience as something that's really formative. And with missions, they're amazing, they're transformative, but you remember that cookie cutter from that school up north? That's what they've all got. Anyway, so that's the main bulk of my presentation. I just wanted to go over that handout really fast. I promise I'll be done soon.
No, you're fine.
Everyone have their paper? So I just kind of threw this together. This is not like an extensive list of everything that needs to be done, but these are just a few checkpoints that I think you should go over before you submit or before you go into what you're doing. So like the personal statement, make sure you get it peer reviewed by a lot of different eyeballs. And I put 5 on there. I'd go for more if you can. And like I said, try and get a variety of skill sets looking at your paper. Seen by RHS leaders. Oh yeah, well, one thing with personal statements, make sure it's just not like a rehash of your experiences, like a chronological time by time. I did this and this and this. You can include a little bit of that in there, but try to be something where you kind of get to know you personally.
Which do they read first usually, the experiences or the personal statement?
Wait, say that again.
So when they review an application, like when you're doing their 5 minutes.
Personal
statement.
statement.
Do they start with the personal statement first?
Yeah, so because that's just the order that we get it. So personal statements, the first page we see,
Okay.
and then I think experiences were next, and so usually people just present in the order that is given to them.
This wants to be very intriguing and stick out.
A little bit. You don't want to be too intriguing. There's definitely. For residency applications, and it might be weighted a little bit more in medical school applications, but for residency applications, what they taught us and what I think kind of holds true is, be a little on the boring side. You want to stand out, but you don't want to, come across as like overly something. sorry, those are kind of like the most amorphous things. The most amorphous part of your application is going to be your personal statement. And I've had some people with, really boring personal statements that they're like, oh, this is a great personal statement. So, and then I had other people with these really flashy personal statements like, oh, this is a great personal statement. A lot of times it's just going to depend on the luck of the draw of who's presenting you. Like this one person, they did theirs, it was kind of cool. It was like all kind of like poetic and like stanza and like very interesting and flashy, and it seemed like half of the room was like, oh yeah, that's really cool, I really like that, and the other half was like, that's just not for me. And it's kind of like abstract art, like some people are gonna like it somewhere. Yeah.
And somebody who maybe talks about music,
Mm-hmm.
and you got assigned to advocate for them, that would ring a little bit more with you. So it is really amorphous. So I mean, I guess my question is, so what? I mean, how do you do it? Just, what are those 5 people going to be able to tell you if it's so amorphous?
Exactly. So one thing, don't have any grammatical mistakes. That's your very first barrier you have to cover, because it's really easy to quantify. You can say they had 5 grammatical mistakes, and that was often what people said. Just as part of their rattling off the presentation, they'd be like, their personal statement, they had, a few grammatical errors, they had 3 grammatical errors, because that's so easy to quantify, so don't have any of those. Then the next thing, they can say, it was very interesting, it gave me a feel for their early life and what led them to their decision to go into medicine. Which, if you're unsure of what to write about, that's always a good thing, so long as you have a good story. If you have a really good story, like I can think of a few, or like this girl who grew up in Pakistan and talked about how they had so many challenges and all of the different cultural issues, like that's going to stand out. So you just have to find a way to let your self shine through, but not too much. not in an abrasive way, I should say. Yeah, sorry I can't give better advice. Personal statements are very individualized, and it's like your hairdo. They have to be tailored to your application. Sometimes a boring statement is going to fit what you're trying to get across a lot more. Like, I'm trying to think of for my residency application when I talked mostly about how I came to decide on neurology. And as I did that, I talked about my experiences along the way that led to that. And it was a perfectly fine, boring personal statement, and it worked for me, I guess. But if you have like these big life-changing things, put them in there. All right. Oh yeah, and then let it flow, because something can be boring and written really well. Make sure that you have a good start and a good end, and that everything flows really well. Because if you have like if it's like, oh, I did this, and I love doing this, and I love doing this, and then, and then you go off, and then I love doing this, and I love doing this, and it's very all over the place and scattered, and you can't really follow it, that can also suck. All right, letters of recommendation. We kind of talked about this, and it's kind of a little late, so I'm going to skip over that. Experiences we talked about. Oh yeah, just make sure that you have adequate patient exposure and medical experience, because a lot of times we'd be in there and it's like, oh, well, they only had like 10 hours 2 summers ago working as, a CNA or something. Do they really know they want to go into medicine? And that's a question that we ask about so many applications. Like, do they really know what they're getting into? Do they really know that this is what they want to do? And if they don't, it's like, well, let's give them another year. You don't want to be that person. Make sure you have good medical experience. And if you don't have it, you can add it. Now it can be too late, but never too late to try. All right, so for your video interviews, make sure that you're dressed professionally, just like you would for a normal interview. Like, it's going to be webcammed in. Make sure that you're in a quiet place with a neutral background. Sometimes people will try and be cheeky and they'll put like University of Utah swag in the background of their, webcam interview, and just pick something, fairly neutral, a bookshelf, you're sitting at your table, something where it's quiet, where we can hear you. Yeah. Oh, and just another note for the essay on the SBI, make sure you still keep it structured well, where you have a conclusion and an ending, because you only have a few minutes to write it, so focus on those 2 points, because a lot of times it does that Odyssey thing where it'll go all the way around and not really have a good conclusion because you're so rushed. But just remember, focus on your framework, have a good beginning and end. Interview day, I guess you guys are going to talk about this more later. I'll just give a few quick tips. So make sure that you've researched the school, make sure you know about their extra programs. My example for residency interviews, I made sure to look up if they had a rural outreach program, each of them, and so in my little bifold, like he was talking about, I always had the name of an organization and say, have you ever worked with this organization that's based out of this medical school? So just make sure you know who you're talking to, and sometimes they'll give you your interviewer, the name of your interviewer before you interview. And so if they do that, make sure you look them up, and you can look up their research and look up what they've done, and you can talk to them about it. Yeah?
Do you know what exact information you gives you for your interview?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty basic. You're not gonna get any interviewers' names because they only do MMIs
Right.
and the other ones, so you won't get it.
Okay. That's kind of what I figured.
Not at the U. Other schools you will.
Yeah. Like we said earlier, make sure you have a list of questions written down and be taking notes during your interview. I actually got a few compliments on that while I was on the interview trail for med school. They're like, oh, usually people don't take notes while we're talking. And I'm like, I'm not going to remember it if I don't take notes. And they're like, yeah, that's a good point. So take notes. Other things, yeah, find an alumni to stay with if you can. I did at almost every medical school I interviewed at, and it was a really great experience. They were able to give me a lot of tips and tricks. And then when I interviewed, they could say, why are you interested in here? Well, I was talking to so-and-so, you can name drop, and and they really love it, and it helped me decide, like whatever, you guys are smart, figure it out. But try and stay with an alumni wherever possible. If any of you end up interviewing at Brown, I really hope you give me a call and come and stay with us out there. Professional clothes, we've beaten that to death today. Have your little portfolio bifold, take notes. What I like doing was I always like driving to the door that I knew I had to walk through the night before, just so I wasn't, confused or like worried the day out trying to find where I was going to be. But that's more of like my,
Yeah, try not to go in on a red eye and be exhausted, and if you don't present well, and it shows. You may have saved $200, but it may cost you an opportunity. So try not to be that person, because you can tell the people who rush in, usually you'll ask them, oh, how was your trip in? And you can always tell that person who's prepared by saying, oh, I got in yesterday afternoon, I was able to drive around the community. I mean, if it's a one-on-one or two-on-one interview, they'll ask you, and that person who is looking hungover, basically, red eyes, tired, yeah, man, I got in late last night, I barely made it to my hotel. Do you want that person? You don't want that person.
Yeah, and then thank you cards. This is kind of all over the place. Like I did a couple, and didn't do a couple. I don't know if it actually really
At the
helps.
U, it's hard to do it. You can't do a thank you note anymore because you have so many interviewers.
Yeah, so I don't know. I wouldn't worry about it too much, but if you're the kind of person who wants to do thank you cards, make sure you get the contact information of who you want to send them to, even if it's just the admissions office itself. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I had to talk about. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, is that a hand up?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. It's
Yes.
super helpful. Super helpful. Also, incredibly discouraging. but I say that just because it appears, and that's like my big question is how much is subjective and how much can we actually control? Because I guess the feelings that I'm having is one of lack of control over the whole process. We can do our very best on our first exam, and we will do everything that we possibly can. But how to manage that anxiety, or like what should we remember? Because you also said, don't worry, you guys are going to be fine.
Well, you'll survive.
Right.
I think I get where you're coming from.
Right.
And you'll never have control over this when you apply to here, when you apply to your residency application, when you apply for grants, when you I can think of 4 situations in the last 4 years where I've been going through stuff like this, and you don't have control because it's based on somebody else's subjective judgment. What you can do is put everything in the nicest package possible. There's a lot of applicants who I think would have gotten in if they had just done this workshop and followed the principles we talked about here. If they would have just had their personal statement revised a bit better. If they would have just had their, all of their experiences filled in such a way that they made sense. So you have a lot of control over how your application appears. I mean, think of it like food. Presentation is everything. And rural health scholars, especially this workshop, really helps people swing above their weight class Like, I had a friend who went to UVU, who's much smarter than me, probably better, I think better grades, much better test scores for sure. And he didn't have anything like this, and he ended up going to kind of a, you know, I hate to say lesser schools because all the schools are good, but maybe a less prestigious school is how I should say. But he was way more deserving than me of going to, you know, the U or a better school. He just, you know, did his application all by himself. He didn't have the people help him work through it. So use the resources you have to take your best self, put your very best foot forward, and that's going to give you the best chance possible. I think everyone in here is well capable of getting into a medical school this year, and if not, getting into it next year. Like, everyone in here is obviously smart enough that they're trying to get help, they're trying to get their application together, and I really believe in you people. I mean, that's why I, you know, woke up super early to be here.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Someone saying something?
Amen.
All right.
We are so thankful for Cody. Apologize that we were running late today.
That's good.
And you have a long drive going back.